Welcome back to Discourse with myself, Abammon the Great, and Dr. Stone, the famed occult researcher. So
Hello.
popular. We love your takes.
Hello.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to be discussing oniromancy, which is, I guess, we're going to be dipping into a lot of different dream interpretation work because oniromancy is specifically is referring to the magical prophesying the future or good or bad events. So that's very much a fortune telling kind of skill. But I like to use the word oniromancy personally to as an all encompassing umbrella term for any occult kind of dream work. And so that can cross into the realm of psychological dream analysis, a la Carl Jung or Freud, who you're going to be going over a little bit here.
Mhm.
I'm going to be coming back with more of a classical perspective, the dream interpreters that I follow suit from. Ibn Sirin, which is a 7th century Muslim. He was the big dream interpretation guy I got into when I first started. And then I'm currently studying Artemidorus,
Mhm.
who is a 2nd century Lydian dream interpreter. So we're going to be discussing mainly dream interpretation here. There's a lot of different things you can do with dream work within the occult, but I think we're going to limit it just to dream interpretation so that we can go over some of the other stuff like sleep yoga and lucid
Mhm.
dreaming and maybe different episodes. But anyways, I'm gonna pass it off to you. You've got a lot of notes there.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting because, like, we've been as people, as humans, we've been trying to figure out what the hell dreams are and what their purpose is for since the dawn of time. It's one of some of the most early written works that were discovered are of dream interpretations or attempt to interpret dreams. And you might be surprised to know that both Freud and Jung, also took from your latest research project, as well, from that philosopher, and that's where they base theirs off of as well. So within the context of psychology, there's a lot of stuff that touches on different mental processes and memory processing and the formation of dreams, like in the mind, being a way to interpret one's daily processes or events that happen, and would be considered the those are ordinary dreams. That's what they're called, ordinary dreams. But the majority of dream analysis, from even a psychological perspective, is bordering on the mystical. It is bordering. It is spiritually analyzed, and only a very few amount of dreams are really linked to any kind of psychological process that's problematic. Most of them are linked to more of a spiritual or mystical nature, and so most people, I don't think, know that. So it's interesting because they, even though they were not practicing spirituality per se, they were definitely using that as a way to interpret dreams for their patients, and it's the cornerstone. Like Freud's work originally, and then Carl Jung was his student, right? And they do have vastly different approaches to dream interpretation and analysis, but they one learned from the other, and then that Jung's method and theory behind dreams is the cornerstone of transpersonal psychology, of analytical psychology, and of spiritual psychology. So that's where we find ourselves with how it relates to spirituality or the occult, right? So let's talk about what kind of dreams were. When we say spiritual dreams, though, there's a few that stand out. One being the precognitive or prophetic dreams. And I don't know about you, but I've had that happen before, where I've dreamt something and then it happens right after that. And when that happens, that's considered to be, from the Jungian standpoint, it's considered to be a message from the higher consciousness or the collective unconscious, right? That you're being able to tap into it. And if it's a warning dream, like a prophetic dream that gets you to act in a way that preserves your, safety or something like that, then that would be absolutely like validation of that being true in Jung's mind, right? Like within his framework. Freud was more about repressed sexual desires, right? Because that's what his whole thing was. Unfortunately, because he had some really good ideas, but then he just got really stuck in that aspect. So Jung he broke off from that and started to look at his own way of doing things, which was, more geared toward this is coming from this collective knowing that we've inherited through our ancestry, and which is the entire sum total of all human experiences, right? That it's just somewhere that people can access it. Have you had prophetic dreams or precognitive dreams before?
Nothing that particularly stands out, but I've been dream interpreting and doing dream work. I think it's my longest running occult skill. It's at a point where if it happens in the dream and then it happens the next day or the day after or something, it doesn't even register to me as, wow, that was spooky. I have such a wholehearted belief in that, this is just a fact of life. These things that are telling you about something that's going to happen. So
right.
I wouldn't say that there's anything. I don't think I've ever had a dream where like my grandma died in my dream and then a week later,
Wow.
she was dead. Like nothing stand out like that, but definitely predictive of the next day's events or more the mundane things. But when we're talking about so Artemidorus, he classifies them between two types of dreams. One's Oneros, and Oneros is from oniromancy, and that's the one where you're getting a prediction of a good or bad outcome that's going to happen. That's the prophetic one, and that's the one that's requires divination. He has another class for dreams, which is enhypnion, which is basically going to be that psychological internal thing. So he basically says that if you're anxious about if you're going to eat the next day or something, like if you're going through a hard time, obviously that night you're going to have symbols in your dreams that are about those anxieties that you're carrying around with you.
Absolutely.
And so I feel like the more, I guess, social and mundane and accepted one is we're doing that. We're looking at these dream symbols and we're looking at like the anxieties or the depressions or, whatever's going on in the common life. So that is then hypnion when it relates specifically to the self, and it has to do with like whatever you're emotionally processing. Now, I think that then hypnion is extremely beneficial. A lot of times it will tell you something that but it doesn't click until you get it from the dream and you interpret the dream and you kind of release it.
Right.
But I think one of the things that you were talking about where you said it's always a spiritual thing or mostly a spiritual thing, it is a spiritual thing in the way that you are doing internal alchemy always, right?
Right.
So when it's a spiritual thing, as in you're like being visited from a god or being guided by a god. So Artemidorus says that the difference between that regular dream and one that's coming down from the divinity is that the one that comes down from divinity is going to motivate you and move your soul to do something.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Then that's exactly what both Freud and Jung have in their theories as well. That's exactly how they operate too. But that's only a few categories, though. The other categories are mostly going to be about psychological processes, repressed memories or something like that. But with regard to spiritual stuff, it's going to be initiatory dreams, right? Or rites of passage. Now, rites of passage could be not necessarily occult-like, because it could be that you're in a part of a culture that has a rite of passage and you're dreaming about that because it's going to happen. But it also can happen before somebody gets married or has a child or something like that, where it signifies, like a change in life, like a major change. But those are typically like initiatory dreams in Jung's framework anyway, would be what you're talking about, where a deity is present in the dream. And the criteria for that, though, is that there is information provided to the dreamer by said deity, and upon waking, the dream is remembered and very vividly, and the dreamer is then able to do something with that information, and it has a positive result. So that would be seen as an actual contact with a deity, according to Jung, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that kind of similar to what you were saying right now about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I've definitely had those dreams before. Like those ones right there, I can definitely point to those and say, like, yes, I've had those dreams before. But there's every once in a while, especially those that are pretty attentive to dream work, every once in a while you're going to have a dream that you wake up and you have this feeling about something that you met in there. It's not just a regular dream character. Like
Right.
something leaves an impression on you. I think one of the most common ones that I get, because I do a lot of dream interpretation. I've been doing dream interpretation since I was very young. It's something that I sometimes go and I work on a little bit. Like my favorite place to do dream interpretation is on the paranormal board on 4chan. And sometimes they'll have those threads, and if I see one of those threads, I'll go and I'll interpret everybody's dreams for them really quick,
cool.
just to sharpen myself, stay practiced, because I definitely prefer to do cold reading with dream interpretation to make sure that it's like my biases aren't in there. Artemidorus, he completely disagrees with this. He says you should know where they were born, you should know their occupation, you should know what they're going through in their life. But he was definitely more concerned with predicting the future. So I guess that would make sense if you're trying to get that information.
Yeah, because then you can see patterns, maybe.
Yeah.
Perhaps. But I think cold, for a lot of different kind of occult divinatory practices, I think cold is best too.
If you're practicing, for sure. If it's like anonymous, I feel like the internet, I know they do it on Reddit. You can go on 4chan, you can go on Discord, and you can just open up like, hey, I'm going to offer some divinations. And like the less that you know about that person, the more you can get back on like, okay, I was actually divining here, and my biases weren't in. I really feel like every time I personally know the person I'm divining for them, I feel like it turns into a therapy session.
100%.
Yeah.
That's like the same with tarot cards for me. Like I prefer to read for strangers any day over people that I know, because I just feel like I'm cheating. I feel like I just know too much, and I'm able to interpret them in a way that I feel like I already know about it's not the same thing. It definitely, when you're doing it cold, it gives that sense of validation to your ability, right? I agree with that. I don't know. I guess back then it might have been a little different, but I would agree with your method, honestly.
Yeah. But I think one of the most common things that I hear from men, though, a lot of men, they have a dream. I don't know if this happens with women. I don't think I've ever heard it from a woman that I've interpreted their dreams, but a lot of men, they'll have a dream where they like meet a woman or a girlfriend or what they think is their future wife, somebody that is completely random. They've never met before. So it seems like a random dream character, but when they wake up, it has such a lasting impression on it. And it's like, I met the most beautiful woman in the world, and I absolutely fell in love with her. And then I woke up, I realized it was a dream, and I felt heartbreak. Like I felt like I had lost my wife or something like that.
Yeah, no, that happens.
And I think that that Jung, he interprets that as that's the anima, that's the feminine aspect of the man. And so, in there, you can see that impression that you have. It's like, did you meet a deity? Did you meet the divine feminine? Or did you, meet just the Jungian anima? And is the Jungian anima the divine feminine? Because he was heavily inspired by alchemy. Yeah. And so there you have this process of like, in those dreams, like, is there a divine alchemy that's happening within those dreams? Well,
yeah, because that's typically what it is. It's revealing conflict between the two, right? The anima and the animus, because like Jung, of course, believed that there was that gender duality within all of us, right? So, and if they were out of balance, you will have problems in your life, and I think that's pretty valid. You can see that everywhere. But so typically speaking, you're going to be looking for that, right? Like to see if that's what's going on, or if it's something different. Yeah. Well, like I think that there is a big difference, though. Like that if you're knowledgeable about it anyway, you'll know, right? Like when it's something that's based out of mythology, or like has like a mythical type feel to it, that's typically going to be what Jung would have considered to be more of a deity than, you know, like a person, like a regular person. You know, and I had one of those dreams recently, and it was very strange. Very strange. That was the first time that, to my knowledge, that I remember anyway, that ever happening. And I was not aware of who it was in the dream. I thought I did, and then I looked it up, and that was not the right thing. But then I found the right thing, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'd never even considered that before. Like, never thought about that particular deity in any way specifically, or so it's kind of weird for me. But you know, there was information provided. That information was heeded. I took it, I used it, and I did the thing, and it ended up in a positive outcome. So that was pretty interesting, especially when I was reading back up on this theory of Jung and his interpretation of like what would be a significant dream. It like was almost word for word what happened in mine, and that was really cool because I wasn't sure, you know, because I'm able to gaslight the hell out of myself all the time. Then, you know, with regards to like lucid dreaming, right? So I know that lucid dreaming is a practice that many people try to achieve and have a hard time with, right? When I was reading up on this stuff, I found something interesting that I was not aware of previously. But the false awakening dreams that you can have, where you wake up in a dream and you're in bed, and you think you're up from sleep, but you're not yet, and some other crazy stuff happens, and then, you know, then you actually wake up, or perhaps maybe it's more layers than that. But those are precursory to lucid dreams.
Yes. So when you were in the living room and you said, oh, I hate the false awakenings, and I was like, I can usually tell. It's, so lucid dreaming is something I developed back in, like, personally in 2013 as a response to some extremely, like, very extreme sleep paralysis that I was experiencing every single night. And it was over the course of summer, and every single night I would have sleep paralysis, and it was at a point where like I didn't want to go to sleep because I was not sleeping. I was staying up because I knew if I fell asleep I was going to get into sleep paralysis. It was really frightening. And so I kind of naturally learned how to recognize that hypnagogic state, so that way I could, you know, take on this entity that was, you know, coming at me. I got fed up. It was like, okay, like, come at me, let's go. And then that would put me into like the dream realm or whatever, and then I was lucid because I had maintained awareness to the hypnagogic state. So it was something that I kind of learned by accident because I was experiencing sleep paralysis. It wasn't until after that experience, like trying to process, you know, once I got into lucid dreaming, Googling, trying to figure out what it was, that I discovered that lucid dreaming was the thing. And then I started reading the techniques, and then I was like, oh, okay, so I can like refine this, make this practice. But it was a completely secular pursuit. But one of those practices is the false awakening is one of the number one triggers that you can use to either maintain lucidity or basically stabilize your dream. Because one of the things that you run into when you first start learning lucid dreaming is that you get really excited once you achieve lucidity, and then you wake yourself up, right? So there's a few techniques that you use in order to stabilize the dream so that you don't accidentally wake yourself up.
The worst.
And the false awakening is one of those techniques, and it's also one of those things that if you can recognize it, there's certain checks that you use in the dream. So when you do the awakening, you make those checks, and then that will let you know that it's a
hand thing. Is it have something to do with your hands?
So personally, and I know this is very frequent with a lot of people, for some reason, when you're in a dream state, your brain has a hard time processing digits. So if you look at like a clock, the numbers will not be numbers. They'll be weird symbols. If you look at your hands, you'll either have
like a number, right? If something's wrong with them.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll have like there was one time my hands looked like sea anemones. I had so many fingers. And then there's other times you'll be like missing fingers. For some reason, the brain has a hard time processing digits in that state. So,
but that's a check. So what do you mean? Can you explain that a little bit? Like, what do you mean it's a check to see? Like, if you look at something with digits, how does that help you?
Yeah. So the hands is another one. So basically, if you're trying to maintain lucidity, you're trying to focus on something. So one of the things that I like to focus on is the texture of the grass. If I realize that I'm in a dream and then I start losing control of the dream, I'll focus on the texture of the grass. Like, can I see the outline of the blade of the grass? And then that brings it into this high definition state. It's like Blu-ray or something. So all of a sudden the colors are brighter, there's more definition. Hands are another one of those things that you can focus on. So if you start losing control of the dream, or you start waking up, you look at your hands and, first you'll see, okay, I'm in a dream because of like my fingers aren't right. But then you'll be able to see, your fingerprints, you'll be able to see the creases, and that will pull you back into the dream and stabilize the dream.
Wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
So these techniques, this is one of the things that I love about basically all things dream, that this is an occult skill that oftentimes, like, it gets overlooked. Everybody's so interested in astral projection, right? So if you go into your magical orders, they will train, this is how you astral project. It gets overlooked. And I feel like oneiromancy and everything that has to do with dream states is such an extremely useful tool, especially if you're trying to get into astral projection. Like, master your lucid dreaming, master your dream interpretation, and that's going to make astral projection a lot easier, right? You're going to be able to grasp it more. But at the same time, so much of our occult work, so much of our contact with the gods, and all across the historical record, you have a space within you. You have a state that you enter for 6 to 8 hours every single night that you can let these things come in, or you can contact these things, right? So you should be training it 100%. So when I was learning these skills, when I was learning dream interpretation, when I was practicing it, when I was learning lucid dreaming, it was a completely secular thing. It was not a magical thing. So when I entered the cult, then all of a sudden I walked in with this skill set of, well, I'm really good at inducing hypnagogia, I'm really good at dream interpretation, and I'm really good at lucid dreaming, right? I have this kind of like mastery over my subconscious mind. I can communicate with it. And so, like, walking into the occult with that skill set, all of a sudden, this ritual work that I do, like, I have this space that these entities can come into. And so those initiatory dreams you're talking about right there, my big initiation was, the whole buildup was trying to let this entity come in and visit me in the dream. I was initiating into Isis, right? Historically, Isis visits you in a dream if she accepts you into her mysteries. So, and then before she will accept you into her mysteries, you have to get to know her brother or husband, Osiris, right? Yeah. So I'd been working all year and preparing to meet Isis in a dream.
Right.
So, in having these skill sets within this dream state, it's like I'm completely primed to do this ritual work and keep doing this ritual work. And when it gets to those 2 weeks where I have to go through my purification and I have to see if Isis will receive me, well, I've got these adept dream practices, Right. So
yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah, like, I mean, that hadn't happened to me until very recent that I remember at all, but and it was definitely, you remember it a lot. It's very vivid, right? And it's different. Like, it just feels different to it, I guess. It did for me anyways. There's interesting ways to interpret some dreams, though. Like, there are a couple methods that are used currently, right? Like, there's Gestalt, there's Jungian, there's still Freudian, surprisingly, and then there's existential analysis as well. And those are all, well, I'm not really too into the Gestalt or existential, actually, because they're basically kind of just reworked versions of Jungian, right? Like, they're not, I mean, well, Gestalt is actually, it came out around the same time. It was in 1937. But, like, the reason why both Freud and Jung got into it is because they had both their crazy dreams that plagued them, right? Like, Freud's dream was the Irma dream. Do you know about it?
I'm not familiar enough.
Okay, it's interesting. So, so he had a real patient named Irma, probably a pseudonym, right? But she was not responding to his treatment. Okay, like she was a problematic patient for him, and he had a dream one night where he's at this big party in this grand hall, and there's all these guests, and she's there as a guest, and he goes to speak to her, and she's clearly in pain. There's something wrong with her, and so he examines her, and he finds that her mouth and her throat are swollen, and it's alarming to him. And then all of a sudden, his colleagues, especially a Dr. M, is there, and they're all talking to him about her, and then they all decide to examine her as well, and they find additional problems. They find these white patches in her mouth, and they find a white scab on her shoulder, and they come to the determination that her problems have been caused by a colleague who injected her with a dirty needle. And then he wakes up from that dream, and he realizes, like, okay, this is so, like, there's so many things wrong here. Like, this is calling me out on my insecurities about my abilities as a doctor. It's calling me out on my anxiety about being wrong and providing wrong treatment or ineffective treatment. It's calling me out on the fact that I feel intimidated by some of my colleagues. It's calling me out on the fact that I don't really like this patient, and I don't want to keep treating her, and I want the responsibility to be off of me and onto the other people. And then he said, well, and then he reanalyzed it and was like, okay, all that's true, but also the fact that that's my interpretation of that dream is telling me that this is my mind's unconscious way of trying to deflect responsibility for something that might be my fault, right? And that dream happened in 1895, and then in 1899 he wrote that book, his book of dream interpretation, and that's how it all started for him. But then for Jung, he had two one of them wasn't a dream; it was a vision he had in waking time. But he had this one, the first dream he had was very interesting. And I find this fascinating, and I would love to have a dream like this. It was called the mannequin dream. And he was in a house that was familiar but not familiar, right? You know how it goes. And he was descending into levels in the home, like going down level by level. And each level represented a progressively more ancient culture, right? Until he finally came to like the bottom, where he uncovered remains and a skull of some ancient person. And that, for him, his interpretation of that was validation of his theory of the multiple layered subconscious, and how we inherit things. And it's like all, goes back generation by generation. So it was kind of like, for him, it was like haha, I was right. But then his prophetic one was right before World War I. He had a recurring vision of a great flood happening all over Europe. And it was a flood of blood and destruction, and it was very bothersome to him. He would tell people about it. He had it like all the time, and it would happen even during his waking hours. Like he'd start daydreaming, and then that would pop into his head. And then World War I happened, and he was like, oh crap, but because of that, like the action that he took was they left right at the beginning, right, of the war. So he viewed that as a prophetic dream. I mean, I don't know what the climate was back then. I have no idea, like what, kind of like if there was news propaganda going on about like if there was rumblings about it prior to it happening, I don't know. But if there wasn't, then that would be pretty significant, If there was, then I'd be a little more questioning about it personally, because it would be like, well, that makes sense. War is always bad, right? But those were the two things that happened to him that he was like, okay, I'm going to see what I can do it differently with Freud than Freud did. So Freud was always about regression, like repressed or hidden desires or fears, right? And that's all the dreams were about, pretty much. He didn't have a spiritual component to it. But Jung came and was like, no, this is not just about that. This is it's a bridge between the psyche and the collective unconscious, or the spirit world, or whatever you want to call it. And that's what it's for. And it's imperative to master your dream analysis for yourself in order to achieve individuation, right?
Yeah.
And that's the process of spiritual and personal growth to the point where you truly know who you are. And I, that's all he said. But like, I'm seeing as who he was. I assume that when he says knowing who you truly are, that it's more of the know thyself kind of vibe than it is about who you are in this body. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
I think returning to his prophetic dream or whatever, it brings me to something really interesting Artemidorus was talking about. So he basically says that in matters concerning a nation, so if you look at classical dream interpretation, biblical, antique dream interpretation, we have it built into our religions, especially the Abrahamic ones, that there's a dream interpreter that interprets the dream of the king, and there's going to be famine, or there's going to be plague. I mean, this is the story of Joseph.
Oh, right.
From the Bible, but it's all over. It's in Assyria. It's in Babylon. This is a very common thing that happens, and Artemidorus, he's basically saying that the only people that are going to have dreams concerning the state or the people or something of that magnitude are going to be it's going to be the king, it's going to be the pharaoh, it's going to be the person that is in charge of that, because they're the only ones that can actually move on it, right? He says, however, the only time that this contrasts is that let's say it'll never come to a single person without the responsibility. He says unimportant people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's calling. He said it's never going to come to a single unimportant person, the prophecy for the kingdom.
Right.
He's like, but what will happen is that if there's going to be a war that breaks out, or there's going to be a famine, it's like a bunch of people in the population will have that prophetic dream.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They'll have the same prophetic dream, and which is because Jung, he goes and he interprets that as the collective unconscious. But I mean, if you wanted to be even a little more modernist or something, you could say, well, there's all these subtle cues that are happening that the population is taking in.
That's
like,
what I mean. Yeah.
And so they're all kind of not realizing that they're taking in all these subtle cues that, like, oh, there's going to be a famine this year, or there's going to be a war in a few months, or whatever it is. So I like that, because it went into, exactly what Artemidorus is talking about. He's like, look, you're not going to have these prophetic dreams about the fate of the kingdom unless you're the king. But he's like, but you could, if a lot of people are having the same dream and it's all the same omen, he's like, that's something that very commonly happens.
That did happen. Yeah. And that is what happened. There was more people, like, as he was talking about it to people, they were like, oh, wait, I had that same kind of dream. Like, so that was
interesting.
Very,
wow.
Like, yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. That's why he,
I mean, World War One, I guess.
Yeah. It's a big, no, the war part's not, but I know what that's like. I've had one of those. Mm-hmm. And it was not asleep. It was just, like I was reading cards, and then all of a sudden this movie just started playing in my head, and it was terrifying. And then I started telling people about it because it was so upsetting. And then other people, some of my clients, I was reading cards for, without me saying anything, said, oh, I had this really disturbing dream, and like, this is what happened in it. And I was just sitting there going like, oh no, like, this is not good, because it's the same exact thing I saw. I like 7 people so far. Mm-hmm. So, and that, that's not good.
Yeah.
That one kind of, I'm hoping that it's not anything that's going to actually happen. But, in his case, it benefited him and his family, because he was able to leave, right? Like, it was enough. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not going to stay around and wait for that to happen kind of vibe,
Yeah.
Which is helpful, definitely. Although I would say that a lot of the times I've had prophetic dreams, they are absolutely useless, like utterly useless for me. Like something that happens to somebody I don't know, but I witness it like the next day, Mm-hmm. There's no way I could have done anything about it. And that's frustrating. And I wonder if that has some kind of meaning to it itself, right? Like,
so I guess this is one of the things that I love in this book that I'm reading. So one of the throughout all the tomes, especially my favorite tomes, there's I use the Picatrix as basically like my go-to spell book
Yes.
or whatever. You'll see every once in a while they'll talk about the effectiveness of magic and how to conduct it, and it always has to do with this type of acceptance or surrender to it, and which is kind of like completely contradictory to what you're trying to do with magic, right? You're trying to impose your will. Like
Right.
you're trying to say like, I want more money, or I want this person to be punished, or I want to sway favor, whatever it is, right? So in that same thing, you'll see in the tomes, there's little footnotes sometimes that say, you have to be able to just accept whatever it's going to give you,
Right.
and like completely accept it. So Artemidorus, he says that when he's talking about, look, if you have a prophetic dream that says there's going to be a good outcome and you are in a disagreeable state of mind, it's going to lessen that good outcome, or it's gonna basically withhold it. Or if you have a prophetic dream that something bad is going to happen and you are in a disagreeable state of mind, it's going to make that worse, and that kind of thing. So basically, what he's saying is the prophetic dream, you can't do anything about it. You just have to accept it. He's like, if you try to fight it and you try to change it, it's going to make the outcome a lot worse.
Okay, so that's just how it's supposed to go then. So it is a cruel joke that that they're playing on me, like, hey, you have this ability, but we can't do anything about it.
So there's so this is where the modern magician differs from the classical magician, right? Or I guess in divination. So in modern divination, we kind of like, if you look at pop astrology, natal astrology, you look at, popular dream interpretation that everybody kind of accepts that, like, yes, that's a thing, that's what we do. You're talking about these personality traits almost, or these parts of yourself that can be changed and adapted, as long as you're able to identify them. When you're talking about antiquity and you're talking about the classical world, they have this concept of fate,
right,
that we don't really have, right? That this is fated to happen, and that's why we're reading the stars. That's why we're divining, because we're trying to, get a glimpse of the train that's coming down the tracks.
Yeah, we can't do anything about it, but like we can know about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's very much built into how they understood divination back then. Yeah, which is in my personal practice, I've kind of come to that same kind of conclusion, just the path is there and you're just supposed to keep walking down it, and whatever happens on the path, I mean, you can want certain things, whatever happens on the path, you just gotta let it happen,
Yeah, that's a common thing. I've heard a lot of people that say the same thing, like, I saw this happening before it happened, but why did I see it? I couldn't change it. I couldn't do anything about it. Like, what's the point? And I've had the same question many times, and then I got an answer about it. And I can't remember who, maybe one of my professors did, but it said, I think it was one of my professors. I'm pretty sure he said, it's to let you know that you can do it. It's just saying, hey, look, you knew about this already, even though you don't know that person at all, and you saw this thing happen to them. Like, 'cause I saw, like, I had a dream that a guy got hit by a car, right, and like went through the windshield, and I saw that the next day, the same car, same guy, and I didn't even connect it. But my friend at the time, Teresa, she was in the car with me, and she goes, "Oh my God, you just told me about this dream you had literally last night," and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And it was everything. In the dream, her and I were sitting next to each other at a dinner table, like, instead of across from each other, and we were looking out of a glass window onto the roadway, and a man was crossing the street, and a blue car hit him, and he went into the windshield and then rolled off the hood. And we were driving out to the nightclub to go party, and I'm at a stop sign, and there's this guy who's walking across the street, gets hit by a blue car, goes up on the windshield and falls back down. And I just was like, oh gosh, 911. And I call 911, and she's like sitting there going, Anna, you understand that you just told me about this happening, and that's when I clicked, and I was like, what? And I was very upset by it because it was upsetting to see that happen, but I'd already seen it happen. So I don't know if it's like that was a way of somehow getting information to like lessen the blow of that visual that I had, that I had to witness, right? Or what. But I don't know who this person is at all. Like, so there's nothing other than me calling 911. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was fated. Like maybe it was fated to be there to help this guy, but I don't know. It was really crazy to me. I just, but you were saying that like in the occult, having the skill set is helpful, right? Well, in my last master's program of consciousness studies, part of my program was dream analysis, a lot of heavy stuff about dreams, actually. One of my classes that I took that wasn't about dreams, though, was a ancestral or, shamanistic traditions, right? That's what it was. And in this class, one of the assignments was to research your lineage and find out where the shamans were in your family. And I'm like, I don't have none of that. I'm like white. I was wrong. And then after we had identified it, we were supposed to do a ritual to invite them to our dreams to give us a message about what our path, what we should be, where should we be heading now on our path? Like what path should we take? Like about practicing magic. That's literally the assignment was. And I was like, yeah, right. That's not going to work. I was completely convinced that I was not going to be able to do this and that everyone else in class would probably have great luck with it. And I wouldn't for some reason. And I kind of thought it was silly, to be honest. And then, but I did it for the grade and it worked in the first night. And I was shocked. I got an answer to the question that I was looking for, and I had to write a whole paper about it. And I got an A on that paper. And it actually happened. I was shocked. Like I had some Viking come to me and talk to me in my dreams about what magic pathway I should be going down. And, I don't know if that's just like power of suggestion, right? Or if the power of suggestion can then entice those things to come and talk to you, in your sleep. Have you had a visitation dream before?
Yeah, multiple for sure.
Yeah.
I think my own personal dream practice is, I mean, every aspect of it is very intuitive at this point. I think I've been doing it for a little over 11 years or whatever. I think what most interests me right now is utilizing hypnagogia and ritual work. So I guess in one of the lucid dreaming techniques that you can do is called wake-induced lucid dreaming. And it's basically almost a self-hypnosis process to where you put your body asleep, but you are kind of meditating and you're keeping your mind awake, and it puts you in that half asleep, half awake state. And from there, you trigger a lucid dream. Well, I think this is kind of reflected in the practice of sleep yoga in the Tibetan tradition. If you can put yourself in that in-between state, especially when you're either before ritual work. I think you did it one night before we did something together, and we got a lot of stuff that happened. But I'm most interested in utilizing that to, I guess, scry in the middle of ritual work and get the visitations there. I'm definitely a part of giving spirits as much substrate as possible to manifest through. And if you can put yourself into that state, and especially doing lifetime dream interpretation, right? So so if you're lucid dreaming and you know how to do dream interpretation, and you know how to do dream and sleep yoga, which is basically maintaining the state of consciousness that you're in, whether it's the hypnagogic or it's the lucid state, right? Then you are able to in lifetime interact with your subconscious with the dream symbols that it's throwing up to you,
right?
And so this right here is some pretty advanced magic that you're capable of doing, right?
Yeah, I would say
so. People think of dream interpretation, it's like, oh, I woke up, I wrote some things down, I got the dream symbols, and it's like, well, how much have you interpreted, right? There are certain symbols that I know that constantly show up in my dreams and have since I was a child, right?
Okay.
I know those symbols like the back of my hand,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if
Right.
I'm within the dream state and I'm having trouble flying, I know exactly what that means for me, that I feel out of
Okay.
control in my waking life.
Yeah.
But I'm lucid.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm able to have a deeper conversation with that symbol, you
Right.
know, and
Okay.
explore and probe that further, right?
Yeah.
I'm also able to maintain my state of consciousness, my state of lucidity, right? So implementing this into a ritual setting to where maybe you're not in the full sleep state, you're in the hypnagogic state where the hallucinations start coming, the dream hallucinations start coming. You're in the ritual state and you're able to have a lucid conversation with whatever's coming through. That is prime territory for spirits, entities to come in and interact with you, right?
Yeah.
This is way more than going into looking into the crystal ball. This is being the crystal ball.
Right.
Right.
Is this like would you say this, so is this, when you say this, the state, the hypnagogic state, is that the alpha state are we talking about, or your
I'm not
brain
familiar.
frequencies equalized on both sides, like so it's balanced? Or
I'm
like
not
the same
sure.
thing as like a flow state people can get into, you know, where you're still like you're on autopilot basically. It's kind of like an autopilot mode, where you're just channeling in like wherever it's coming from. I don't know if that's the same, or you, because that's like typically when we're right between, if you're talking about right between falling asleep and staying awake, that little gray area there, that is alpha state. That is the brain waves that are your theta waves are their lower amplitude, higher frequency, or the other way around. I can't remember actually. I gotta look that up. But it's where both sides. It's like the hemisync thing from the CIA. It's that whole. That's what they were doing to get to that space. So if you can do that, that's crazy.
Well, no, I think I think any lucid dreamer can do that.
That's
Or at
that's
least
a skill.
somebody who practices lucid dreaming, right?
Yeah.
So plenty of people are natural lucid dreamers, and really with lucid dreaming, there's different depths to it, right?
Okay.
So a natural lucid dreamer is somebody that's like, what are you talking about? Like, I know I'm dreaming, you know, but how much are you able to control it at that point, right? And for somebody that practices lucid dreaming, there's like different levels of control. So there's, you know, the surface level, which is just maintaining that awareness or triggering that awareness. I'm in a dream. You know, once you get there, then you have to get to being able to stabilize the dream, right?
Okay.
From there, then, you know, you get a little more advanced and you can change environments, right?
Okay.
After that, you get a little more advanced and you can change objects or summon dream characters. After that, you get a little bit more advanced and you can completely manipulate the entire environment and the dream characters, right?
Okay.
So this is the point where you're able to like, I'm going to open a door and this is going to be on the other side.
Okay, that's what I was just going to ask you to give an example.
A very deep, beyond that, right, is being able to control what state of mind you're in. And this is, the Tibetans call it sleep yoga, dream yoga. Any lucid dreamer who's done wake-induced lucid dreaming, or anybody who has, you'll find with practice lucid dreamers actually enjoy sleep paralysis, because sleep paralysis is what wake-induced lucid dreaming feels like. It's just a little bit less controlled, but anybody who's familiar with sleep paralysis and how to utilize it, and anybody that's done wake-induced lucid dreaming can do the same thing I'm talking about, place themselves into a hypnagogic state. It's maintaining that hypnagogic state, which is difficult. And that's where sleep yoga and dream yoga come in, because those are actually clear defined practices. Like, okay, you can get into with dream yoga, it's like you can get into the lucid dream. Now, what are you going to do with that lucid dream? Are you going to fly around, or are you going to do some spiritual work? Are you going to meditate? Right.
Okay.
And with sleep yoga, that's very much, can you maintain that consciousness, that conscious awareness, and can you hold on to that in-between state?
And that's because, correct me if I'm wrong, they believe that, or some of these cultures believe that when we die, you have to maintain that awakeness, so that you don't reincarnate again or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
right?
You can either choose your next. So within the Tibetan practice, if you get good at sleep yoga is supposed to be preparation for the bardo, that transitionary period. You can either choose your next incarnation or have some sort of say in it, or not incarnate altogether.
Okay,
Right.
but if you don't remember, if you're able to keep yourself conscious during that time frame, then when you do reincarnate, you'll have memory of your plans.
Yeah, so this has to do within the Tibetan practice. This has to do with the karma of ignorance. So when you're born and you're wiped of your memory of your past lives, you don't know what karmas you're walking around with from past lives.
Right.
So if you do sleep yoga and you're able to remember this life and your next incarnation because you did sleep yoga, you're aware of you don't have the karma of ignorance, right? Those chains of ignorance. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting.
I always feel really uncomfortable spilling a little insight on my interest in the Tibetan practice just because that's, I'm not initiated into that practice. So
I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think you can be interested in whatever practice you want.
Yeah.
Appropriation idea of appropriation is nonsense to me. It's just another way for people to get upset about nothing. Any spiritual practice should be highly personalized and pulled from whatever resonates with you. I believe that's totally acceptable in my book, and if people don't like it, I don't give a shit. That's crazy to me that people are, think that way, think that that's a problem. But that's another thing. But yeah, so so that is correct then. That's not just something I heard. That is what it is.
Yeah, in the Tibetan practice for sure. But the thing is, with all across the occult, you're going to find certain symbolism. Sometimes it's concealed within symbols, and sometimes it's said plain as day that sleep and death are the same thing.
Okay.
That they're innately tied with each other.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, I've experienced both, and I just say that they're very similar, but death is different. It's more vivid than dreams. But definitely more vivid. And
so I think that within the occult practices, and this is what makes it so strange to me that oneiromancy is glossed over and looked over, because if you read, I mean, for example, Valentin Tomborg, who talks about his entire gnosis on the 13th Arcanum, the death card, that entire chapter is about how, memory is little sleep and sleep is little death, right? And so those three things are intrinsically linked to each other. Then you'll see the Tibetans, they completely say, look, if you can remember things while you go through that transition, they say dying is like falling asleep, and if you can remember things when you go to sleep, then you can remember things through death, that kind of thing. This is all over the occult. And yet, when you go and join your magical order, they're not going to teach you dream interpretation, lucid dreaming, or some of them might dip into sleep yoga, some of them. But
really?
Yeah.
I've heard dream interpretation at one of mine, but not anything else. And that was really lightly glossed over as well. Yeah. So what are some common, not necessarily to you or I, but common overall symbols that one might encounter, and what do they typically mean? I know it can be different for everybody, but there are there's some basic ones, right? Like the house, or let's just start with the house. What house? If you're in a house, it symbolizes yourself, right?
Yeah, so it's your inner world, right? So your inner self.
Yeah. So if it's messy, if it's clean, if it's warm and welcoming, cold, whatever the environment is
if it's dark, if you don't recognize it.
That would mean that you have hidden aspects of yourself you're not aware of, or
a lost sense of self. You don't know who you are.
Okay. Yeah. So that's one major one that
or
people get.
You're going so I think one of the dreams that I've interpreted before was somebody murdered their mother inside their house. But the house, they didn't recognize. It was a weird I don't know, they said it was a 1970s coke dealer house or something like that.
Pretty specific.
And he said he's in the house and murdered his mother. I didn't really know this person that well, and this person was just telling me about this weird dream that they have, and where they murder their mother inside this dark house that they don't recognize, and I just look at them I'm like, so how do you feel about your mom? Like,
Right.
like it's very obvious, like, there's a lot of frustration going on there. Yeah,
well, what about the house that he doesn't recognize? What's that?
well, there's an unreconciled rage against his mother,
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe he lies to himself and says that, he likes his mom or whatever, but the reality is there's this like complete
I see.
other animal inside of him that
I see.
absolutely hates his mom
So-
and in turn hates women,
Right. So him not recognizing the house he's in symbolizes he's not being honest with himself about his feelings, or like in the dreams.
Or he's covering it up, or,
Yeah, the
or
dream,
something.
because like
Yeah.
so typically it's thought that like dreams are a safe way to express the things that we can't express outwardly in our waking life, right? Like that, like murder, or
Yeah.
very much rage against somebody, like, or jealousy, whatever, all the negative traits, right, that we can't express in real life, right? I guess so. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know, and it's also telling him if it's his mom, right? He's feeling killing his mom, so he's that the Anna too.
So yeah, your mother. Usually, when you see somebody that's direct, it's representative of your relationship with them, right?
Right, not the person itself, right? Like
not the person themselves, right? Unless it's a prophetic dream. But the prophetic dream, if it's dealing with like somebody else is going to die, it's usually going to be through a symbol, right? So a certain body part will go missing, right? So like, let's say your dad's gonna die, your right arm might go missing in the dream or something. Whereas if you have a dream where it's actually your father who's dying, you're talking about a relationship, the relationship with your father. And like once that's spun onto it, right, death takes on a completely different meaning. So then within that, death is kind of transformative and rebirth, and it's not the omen of your dad's gonna die,
Oh my gosh, you just totally solved something for me right now. Thank you so much. I will tell you later about it. Oh my God. Very, very, that was serendipitous what you just said. Thank you. That's very, very great. Yeah, I get what you're saying by that. But my daughter, my oldest one, has had a dream of a prophetic dream about death, her grandmother dying. About a week before it happened. And I remember her coming to me and telling me the dream, and I was like, oh shit, and it was, I saw Nana, she got in a boat and she just waved at me as I stood on the shore as she like sailed off into the sunset. And I was like, shit. And sure enough, she died that same week.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn it. And I knew exactly. And she knew what it was too. She was like 8.
Yeah, that just sent chills down my spine.
Yeah.
I like, God.
Yeah. Like she's like, that was, and I knew
it's very obvious.
Yeah. Like, I mean, but she's 8, coming to me telling me that, like, and she knew already what it meant. She knew. She knew. She's like, Mom, she's gonna go away, isn't she? And I was like, probably. Like I would have said that. And it was, but then you know what though? It helped her with that because she'd already seen it. So when it actually came to it, she was sad, but she wasn't like, it kind of prepared her. So I think that there's like, I'm not sure at that age like how many cues she was able to see of that process starting, but because death is a process, right? Like, so I'm not sure, but because she was with her dad at that point, but like, it was very eye-opening to me, like, about that. Like, I was like, damn, this is inherited, isn't it? Like, I'm not sure. She's definitely, she has those dreams all the time though, and every time they're right. And so she knows, and she doesn't like getting them because now she knows it means something serious, right? But those are, so like, but typically if a person's in your dream, unless it's a visitation or prophetic dream, it's going to be symbolizing the relationship
with them,
right? So it's not a literal, right? So a lot of times people look at dreams very literally and they don't make sense, right? That's because of a couple things. There's during sleep, right? And I think this is fascinating because Western culture is probably one of, there's a lot of cultures in the world that look at dreams as just as important as events that happen during waking life, right? And take it very seriously and spend a lot of time and effort on that, right? Of conditioning their dreams or whatever. and or analyzing them when they awake, because they're like said to be part of your spiritual self, right? So they're important to pay attention to. We kind of disregard them on a mass scale, like most people don't really think about their dreams too much, other than it was just a dream. But what's happening while we're sleeping, when we enter REM sleep, is that our visual, motor, and emotional cortexes, those control centers of the brain, are highly active. But the areas of the brain that are responsible for rational thought are almost inactive. So it's allowing us to process things from the day, convert short-term memory to long-term memory through the hippocampus and the amygdala, and then it's also helping us process traumas or whatever, or so that we can it catalogs and files our memories for us, and it looks for like schemas and tries to add on to pre-existing knowledge, whatever, and it stores it for you. But I think that the big thing is that the rational mind is suppressed at this time. So
That's
we
really
can
funny.
visually see and feel, so we can feel emotionally, motor skills too, so we can move about and our mind can still have us moving. And then the visual aspects are highly, like the most active that they are ever during REM sleep. There's other stages of sleep that you can dream into that produce dreams, but they're not anything like what happens in REM sleep. And so I think that it allows that's the filter, right? Like the logical part of the brain is that filter that keeps us separate from like the spiritual side of things, right? And keeps us grounded here in the material world. Like it doesn't real if we can't measure it, So I think that is proven by neuroscience. I mean, like I worked in a sleep research lab for 20 years. And that's what I did for 20 years with the government sleep research. And I don't know if you know that, but like that's what I did. That's all I did. And it was just sleep deprivation studies, things like that. And it was so this is neurobiology. This is facts about the brain, what's happening. So we can still get information, but we're going to see it in a visual, emotional, and physical way, right? In our dreams, because our rational mind's suppressed. So I think that's interesting.
There's something that I like to call dream logic. And dream logic, like you saying that, it's like, yeah, that totally checks out with like dream logic. Because dream logic is very much like cartoon logic or whatever. So it's like if you are being chased by something and want to set it on fire, instead of like putting your hands out and trying to catch it on fire, it's like reach into your pocket and pull out the flamethrower that you have in there, it's this, when you're in the dream and you're trying to like control things and manipulate things, you have to think in this like cartoonish way, because if you try to go for the direct rational way, it's not gonna work.
Occam's razor is not applicable here, right?
It's
Totally.
like so funny. It's like, oh, that makes sense. The rational mind's turned off. That's why it's like Looney Tunes in there,
Right, it is.
Yeah.
And it's not completely turned off, but it's the lowest point that it is, in our existence is when we're sleeping. So, but then there's a couple other, like, I think a lot of people will experience those recurring dreams, right?
Yeah.
That happen. And a recurring dream, the qualification for that is that it's always the same. Like maybe the people might change, but the scenario and the feeling that you get from it is always the same. And it's, in my case, I don't know, I would love to have a recurring positive dream. That'd be awesome. But it was always negative. Like it was always stressful.
It's a big red flag. If you're having a recurring dream, when people come to me and they say they're having a recurring dream, it's like, tell me right now, like what's going on? Because a recurring dream is your brain's way of telling you like, hey, like this needs to get fixed right now. It's causing you a lot of problems.
Yep. Yes. And it will not be resolved. If that dream will not stop until you in waking life resolve whatever the problem is. Right. And that I can attest to that. Like that happened to me. And I was just like, what? It just, as soon as you knew what it meant, it was like, oh, okay, it never happened again. But that is the criteria is that it's always the same feeling that you get from it in the same scenario. And then there's also a couple other ones that are interesting to me actually are the problem solving ones. Have you had that?
How so?
So,
Oh, I
you
know
know,
exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, like where you have some drama in your life, like some conflict, whatever, or some issue you got to take care of, and like you don't know how to go about it,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like racking your brain all day, all night, like whatever, and you're trying to figure it out, and then one day you wake up and you're just like, I know what to do, like you just know what to do. Most of the time, it's like they say that it'll come as like you just know what to do when you wake up, and sometimes you won't even remember what you dreamt of that made you understand how to fix the problem, but you were able to fix the problem all of a sudden. And
Mm-hmm.
it could be something that you've stewed over for like a long time and it just comes to you, the solution. And so that is interesting to me because that's the exact opposite of what should happen if your logical mind is turned off, right? Like if it's suppressed. So how do we account for that?
So there was yeah. So there's this kind of once you start getting into the woo age side of lucid dreamings,
The
uh
what?
the woo age,
Okay.
the like
I got it.
the like kind of like mystical side of lucid dreaming. Um there's a lot of people that like to experiment it with either dream walking. Basically like a group of people will plan like we're gonna
Meet up.
go through the same we're gonna dream this door and we're gonna walk through it and we're gonna meet each other.
Oh,
But then there's also accessing the Akashic records.
mm-hmm.
And so basically, you're supposed to ask one of the dream characters, hey, can you take me to the library or
Mm-hmm.
something like that?
Mm-hmm.
And then it will walk you to a door and you'll
Right.
go in the door and then you'll have access to all the world's information. And so within the kind of occulted, mystical, astral projection part of it, there are a lot of people that believe through dream states that you can access like all the universe's information that ever was. It was through this that I got interest, but this was back when I was a musician. I think this was in like 2015. I was writing an album and I got really interested in trying to utilize dreaming techniques in order to help me write the music, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I had to go through this dream logic process in order to write music, and I still have some of these songs, but
Mm-hmm.
I would go into like when I was in the dream state, I would go to my dream computer and I would open up my Ableton Live folder on my dream computer and pull up all the projects and see what Dream Me was working on, and then I'd click on the project and I'd like listen to the song. Then I'd wake myself up and I'd immediately
Oh,
write
wow.
down the song.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, no, it was amazing, and I mean it's amazing, but it's something that can 100% be done. Like creative problem solving, you know. I got like some really far out there cool chord progressions that I would have never written by myself, or if I was stuck on a song, let's go on the dream computer and see how Dreamy finished the song,
That's
right?
so
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah,
I've definitely had um, solutions come to me in dreams.
yeah.
Absolutely. Like but my thing, I can't remember how I got them. Like I wake up and like literally jump out of bed and be like, oh my gosh, I know exactly what to do and run to do the thing immediately, multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically within the last 5 years. Ever since like I guess my near death thing, it's been like that. And papers get written that way too. Like,
Yeah.
what should I write about? And then it'll come up in the dream. Those I remember, but the other ones, it's just like fixing something or solving some problem. It's just I don't remember. Like I just didn't know all of a sudden how to do it or what to do, and that's very interesting. But it doesn't make sense based on the science of how we sleep and how we dream. Because
Unless it's something that you already know, like
well,
that's what it's all implying, you know.
mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of like the occulted part of it. I mean,
Yeah.
Carl Jung was trying his hardest to say that in modernist words,
Oh,
right?
he said it.
Yeah.
He did say it.
Yeah.
He absolutely said it. He said that it was all the ability to access the collective knowledge
Mhm.
repository, right?
Mhm.
And the collective unconscious. And I was like looking into the research about that, about like how well was that received back then, right? Like
Yeah.
because we were very heavily into the science, you know. Well, spiritualism was like kind of dying out, right, or having a lot of controversy around it, and then
Yeah.
we have these guys, well, specifically Jung, though, and it was actually fairly well received. Like he did word it in a way that made it okay for it to be more mainstream, But if you read his actual work, right, not his truncated work, not his revised work, or not his paraphrased work, right, like by other people, you'll see his books are rather interesting, very much so. Like his red book and black book are full of definitely interesting, not mainstream ideas, right? And he had a lot of crazy dreams that he wrote about, but I think it was fairly well received to the point where it's therapeutically applied, right? Like even back then, they were applying it therapeutically. Now, was it like across a large scale? No, it was these two guys doing it, right? Like, Freud and Jung were doing that pretty much at the same time, but then at some point they branched off from each other because, again, Freud's got stuck on that sexual stuff. Constantly. That's all, everything was about that. But yeah, like, I don't know. I think that anxiety dreams too, like anxiety dreams aren't really common. And those are, those are seen to be, from Jung anyway, as your anxiety will appear to you as symbols, right? It won't come, like, it's not going to be like you're experiencing the anxiety necessarily in your dream, but there'll be external symbolism that is symbolic of that anxiety, right? So if you have like, I can't even think of an example right now. I had one and it slipped my mind, but it was saying that you have to make sure that you're looking at the symbols not from like a perspective of, oh, I saw a bell, and so what does that mean? Like, like, was it a loud sound? Like, no, what's the bell symbolizing for you? Like, you have to like look at those things, and most people can't do that for themselves, so they need someone to interpret, right? And so, and they kind of came across this by accident because they were meeting with patients and having them tell them their dreams. Actually, let me rephrase that. A lot of their patients were coming to them and telling them their dreams, right? And like, I've had this, I'm very upset today. I can't get out of my head. I had this dream, whatever. And they would be like, like you said, just, okay, tell me what's going on. And then they'd tell them, and for them, it's easy for them to see what it is. But for the person that's the dreamer, it's not so easy to see. So how do we get there? Like, how do we get from the person that can't see it for themselves? Like me, I have a hard time interpreting these things. I told you a dream and you freaking immediately.
Well, I think my dream practices are my strongest occult practices for sure. So I know that my dream readings are better than any other readings that I do.
I mean, you killed mine today, like,
yeah,
both of them.
and instantly. yeah, instantly. But it's like, so the thing is, when you're divining, right? Your ability to divine, if you're interpreting symbols, so there's, I guess, the different methods of divination. So when you divine, there are times that you're channeling, like you go into a trance, right? But like the kind of like baseline divination, right, is that you're interpreting these symbols. You're basically based on the internal work and your own experience, and you're projecting that onto the other person, right? But because you know these symbols and your own experiences so deeply, and how these things like interact, and you're basically banking on this being a universal thing, right? And then you're kind of projecting that onto the person that you're reading. So, like when you're doing inner alchemy or you're reading tarot, the reason that you're able to interpret the cards, right, is because you ran into those cards before. You know what those symbols mean to you, what those cards mean to you, and you can weave that into a story, right? And then you just trust your intuition and you say the story to the person, and then they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, or that's totally right. So it's the same thing with dream interpretation. I've spent a lot of time doing dream work. I know what the symbols mean to me. I've practiced on other people, and I had to get to a point where you have to it's divination. You have to trust your intuition on it. Right. You have to. It is divination. You can call it dream interpretation as much as you want, but if you're overthinking it and you're systematizing it, if you don't have that, all these symbols are happening, here's my gut reaction, that's what it's saying, and then you just blurt it out and spit it out. If you don't have that, you're not going to be interpreting the dreams well.
So then are you saying, is that just another way of saying then you have to have a good understanding of
Yourself,
people in general, of like the themes of
know thyself.
I mean, I know, right?
Know thyself, right?
Because if you know yourself, you know everybody else, right? Because we're all the same shit. Well, mostly.
Yeah.
Definitely not everybody.
That's how I don't know why it works that way with divination, but that's how it works. If you're really good at divining, and when you're divining, it's like, oh, well, like I'm so interested in you, like that kind of stuff. And literally the only thing I'm thinking about is like how do I interface with these symbols, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. And then like also it's true. It's like every time I read cards for somebody, I think to myself, I'm just making up this story. Like I'm as it's coming out of my mouth, I'm like, I'm just making this up as I go. And I'm like, there's no way. And then they'll be like, oh my God, how did you know that? And I'm like, what? Like, it's just like so crazy. It's always like that. And it's my logical mind that just will not stop. It only stops when I'm sleeping. And even then, I swear, I think sometimes in my dreams that I'm like, this isn't logical. Like, I do that all the time. But I do the hand thing, which is crazy. And I'm going to talk to you more about that later. But like, that blew my mind a little bit ago. But there's two things to look for in dreams, right? If you're trying to interpret dreams. There's the manifest content and latent content, right? Like, and those are Freudian and then Jungian ideas. The manifest content is the theme of the dream, like what's happening in the dream. Like, oh, you're at a party and you're seeing people that you know, etc. Like the overall broad picture. The latent content is the symbols and the feelings and the things that need to be analyzed. So it's not the theme, right, necessarily, unless it's a recurring dream. It's not the overall picture of what's happening, because what's actually happening is not what the dream's about. It's the dream's about the symbols of what's happening, right? Which can be hard for people to get what that means. So maybe you can explain that better.
Yeah. So the symbols are by no means sequential or whatever. So in the process of interpreting a dream, basically you're pulling, like if somebody's reciting their dream to you, you're pulling out any relevant symbol, and then you're just breaking it down into the simplest symbol, right? So I guess the overall theme of the dream, that you called it the manifest or whatever. Yeah. The overall theme of a dream, what I look for is the emotion as the theme of the dream. So, is the person scared, confused? Are they happy? Like I look for the overall emotion, like the main emotion as the theme of the dream, because that's going to affect how what the symbols say. Okay, but you'll let's say you can get 10 symbols out of somebody's dream, right? So let's say somebody was came to me, they say, Abammon, I had this dream last night, and I was walking out of my house and I grabbed this cup and I got on top of an eagle and we flew off into the sunset, but while we were flying into the sunset, I ran into a kite, right? And it's but the kite, it was orange and yellow and red and that kind of stuff. What I heard that person say is house, cup, eagle, sun, or flight, travel, sun, right? Those are my symbols that I'm working with. And then I'm going to see that this travel, I'm going to see that the house is representing the inner self, and then I'm seeing the sun is representing the inner self as well, right? So there's multiple symbols within this dream that are representing the inner self. So there I can see a lot of the symbols, even though they're different symbols, they're going to be talking about the same thing. And that's going to basically be that's the focus of this dream. And it's not going to happen in sequential order. So Artemidorus, he says that the beginning's in the end, the end's in the beginning.
There's no time.
Yeah, exactly. Or whatever. But he goes as much to say the same, right? So I'm basically not really looking at the sequence of events. And I'm not looking at I guess, are you in a forest? Are you at a party? I'm not looking for that. I'm looking what is the emotion that you're experiencing in the dream? And then I'm looking at the symbols and I'm basically trying to break out as many symbols as possible. I'm ignoring any of your minor details. I'm not hearing those, right. Oh, the kite was orange and red. It's I don't get, it's not helping me with anything. But at the same time, it's when you're going to a dream interpreter, give them as much details as possible, because you don't know what is a symbol.
If you don't know, right. If you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things to take, to look for things that are maybe out of place or like that catch your eye a lot,
Mhm.
you know, like something in a dream that just you keep going back to or looking at or fixating on in the dream is probably something significant. Especially if it's like some random, like some kind of random object. Like for me, I've had dreams where I, like, again, I didn't know what they meant until someone told me what they meant. And this was many years ago. This was in my 20s. Um, but it was like once I heard it, I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Seriously. That's what it, you know, it was so simple. Like it was so, and I think that's part of the problem too, is with a dream analysis. It's like, we tend to make everything, well, us as a human race tends to complicate things more than they need to be, right? About like everything. So, and I have the tendency to do that when I'm trying to analyze my own dreams, right? I
Mhm.
overthink it, like you said, and and then I lose a meaning in it, right? And so it needs to be just the simple, like the first thing, like Freud's. So like what you were saying right now when you're describing your process of interpreting someone's dream, it reminds me a lot of Freud's free association
Mhm.
method, right? Where you have somebody just start saying words that they feel are like linked to that dream, you know,
Mhm.
like and just calling out things or like as you were writing, because I saw how you did mine.
Mhm.
And as I was telling you, I saw, you know, afterwards the notes that you were taking and you're just using word, just like one word or one small phrase, you know, and writing
Mhm.
it down. And when I saw it like that, it made a lot of sense, right? It
Mhm.
definitely did. And that's what that would be considered you doing free association right there.
Yeah.
Like, according to his method, right?
Mhm.
Um, where you're taking the bits and pieces that you find relevant and, and focusing in on those. And you're correct, like 100%. In fact, just for the record, I've had those dreams analyzed before by
Mhm.
other people, okay?
Yeah.
Including my dream, the consciousness of dreams instructor,
Mhm.
who is, that's her practice. That's what she
Yeah.
does in her therapy setting in Santa Barbara.
Mhm.
She got, like, I felt like it was right, like, you know,
Mhm.
but today when you did it, it was like, oh, dang, like,
Yeah.
that's way more right, like, way more correct.
I'm
Like,
like I'm like when it comes to dream practices, I'm too overpowered. Like
you're,
I'm a game breaker.
like,
Like it's crazy.
you didn't even finish telling me. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
enough. Like, you're right. Like, it's good, dude.
Yeah.
We're good. You got it. Oh,
Yeah.
shit. Like, I didn't even see those connections until you said it. And the second you did, I was like, oh, wow. I was impressed. I
Mhm.
gotta admit, I was very impressed. But yeah, like it seems it's very reminiscent of the free association kind of model that Freud proposed and would use on his patients.
Mhm.
You know, minus the sexual innuendo of everything.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually I wanted to bring up though, you were talking I think a lot earlier. Um, so you were talking about the anxiety dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I actually had a quote from this book. It's called the Oneirocriticon, and this is the Artemidorus book that I've been reading, that I keep quoting. But I'm reading this book because I'm working on a specific project that has to do with dreams, and then we decided, okay, we're gonna do this episode on dreams since I'm already balls deep in this project. But I thought this was pretty interesting as I was reading, because this book is bringing me a lot of insight, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of insight. I've never read this book before, never heard of it before, but apparently it's a pretty big deal in the dream interpretation world. But one must understand that the things that are manifested to people who are anxiously concerned about something and who have asked the gods for a dream do not correspond to the objects of their concern, signifying something about the present, since those dreams that are similar to the dreamer's thoughts are non-significative and in the hypnion class, as the earlier section has shown. These are called anxiety dreams and petitionary dreams by some men. Those dreams, on the other hand, which visit people who are not anxious about anything and which foretell some future good or misfortune, are called God sent. I do not, like Aristotle, inquire as to whether the cause of our dreaming is outside of us and comes from the gods, or whether it is motivated by something within, which disposes the soul in a certain way and causes a natural event to happen to it. Rather, I use the word in the same way that we customarily call all unforeseen things God sent. So this is this passage like really jumped out at me because basically, I mean, I know I talked earlier about how I'm preparing myself for entities and to come into my dream state, but basically he's saying that if you are thinking about something and then dream about it, obviously you're gonna dream about it. Like, come on,
Right,
dummy,
yeah.
like this is an anxiety dream, like you're obsessing over it,
Right.
like this is why you had this dream about this god. He's like, it's when it's completely unprovoked, and you receive something, that's when it's like, that's when you have to like really pay attention and take a step back and be like, okay, like what just happened here, it's my inner self like really telling me something. However, he does go, I love the reason I included this part about Aristotle. I think it's funny that you said that Freud and Jung really liked this guy too. um the translator seems to think that Artemidorus is extremely afraid of being criticized by skeptics, right? So dream diviners, same kind of class in the antique world as astrologers and alchemists and magicians, right? They're kind of like dirty, not like you don't want them around. They're kind of dregs of society. They're seen as charlatans. I mean,
I guess.
still are. So Artemidorus, I really like this book because he's presenting himself in this, like, especially for the time, this completely like rational way. He's very afraid of getting critique from the philosophical school of skeptics. And so you see he's got this kind of like Epicurean philosophy, Stoic philosophy, and skeptic philosophy that's running throughout this manual for dream interpretation. But he says that he collected all the resources that, like, basically every book, he says every book ever written on dream interpretation, right? Okay. He says that he collected that, and that's what he sourced for this. He also says, he's like, I went down to the like the market center or whatever, and I consulted all those illiterate dream interpreters down there and got there. And he's basically saying that, like, no, these guys know what they're doing, but like everybody, kind of shits on them and thinks they're like crazy charlatans and that kind of stuff. But the book he's presenting is like, look, I'm not like trying to sell you on anything. I'm not saying that this comes from the gods or not, right? He's like, I'm just saying like what I know from my personal experience, and this is why I'm the best dream diviner around, or whatever. So he basically wrote the book as a manual. First, it was to gain notoriety because he writes it to Cassius, but then the last two books in this book he writes to his son as a way to give him an edge on other dream interpreters. It's like, look, these are my hidden secrets,
I mean, they had a lot of but they had a place in society like this whole time, like, since the beginning. Like, there's the story of Tutmosis the Fourth, right? I think, who in his dream, the Sphinx said, "You'll become Pharaoh if you have all the sand around me dug out, like dig me out from underneath the sand, right? And you'll be prosperous and your people will thrive." And he did that, and it happened. So, and that was divined by whoever the royal diviner was then. And so, like, that's something. I mean, like, the idea that we just crap on them, right?
Yeah, court astrologers were always a thing. Court wizards and magicians, like, yeah, they're a thing, but for the most part, the way that society looks at them is like, you are a drag of society. You are the outcast in the village. You're probably a charlatan. I don't know if I can trust you.
Maybe.
And if something bad happens, it was probably your fault. Yeah, exactly.
Well, so if they're part of the royal family, okay, then I would see how commoners would be like, screw those people, like, because they're part of the bourgeoisie, whatever, right? Like, they're part of the problem. And then when that stopped being a thing, like, or died out with all of that, then I guess I could see that being, like, again, like a fortune teller, like, it's because it is, it's not a science, right? It's not provable. Like, we cannot hold it to any kind of scientific standard.
Well,
really.
I think the interesting thing, and I think this is why you don't see it in occultism, they spend too much time on the dream practices. It's because science and secular society the only thing they don't jive with is that you can tell the future with dreams. Everything else
Right.
about this occult practice is completely accepted and by mainstream society. It is researched heavily.
Mm-hmm.
It's and it always has been. It's always been an acceptable practice. Dream divination is the only form of divination that is sanctioned by the Abrahamic faiths. That's the only one they'll allow you to do. They'll say you can't do astrology, you can't cast bones, you can't do witchcraft, but you can divine dreams 100%.
I mean, okay, so I'm looking it up because I know that was a thing, but I know there was a pope. I want to say it was Pope Augustus that had a dream. I'm going to double check that really quick, but whatever pope it was, way back was like, I had a dream about a woman, a sexual dream, right? And he was just mad about it, right? Like he was like, this is not fair, or whatever his deal was. And so he had it added in that you're not supposed to do it, like for some time. And then I think it got removed again. But like there was a time where it was seen as the devil, like, so he attributed it to the devil trying to entice him through dreams, right? To give up his, celibacy or whatever. And so then all of a sudden it was like a practice. I learned this in that consciousness of dreams class. I was like, wow. And I believe I'm going to look right now, but he was like, no. So for a period of time, it was seen as like heresy, like, or
I think thing. This is hilarious because I know that the whole succubus thing succubus and incubus thing started the same way. It was a bunch of like, this is just so funny to me though, because there's a bunch of monks or priests that are taking these vows of chastity, and then they start having wet dreams.
Yeah. Yep.
So they have to invent this entire class of demons that are inspiring these wet dreams. It's like, no, you dummy, you're not masturbating or having sex.
Yeah.
That's why this is happening to you.
I mean, there was, this is biology, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's flipping biology. It's what allows us to be here to this day.
Yeah.
It's a requirement. Like, it's a requirement for us to procreate, right? So knowing that,
it must be the queen of the demons sending her daughters to me in my sleep, and then also, what does that say about like the incubus? It's like the guy that comes out and he's like, hey, like, a demon was doing things inside my butt last night.
Yeah. No, I mean, seriously, like, they're blaming it on the devil, right?
Exactly.
And
it's like, couldn't be that repressed homosexuality. My guy could have,
Yeah, I don't like. Yeah, it's always that. It's always the witches or the devil or some succubus, incubus, whatever.
Yeah.
But it was always starts from the church. It's always their problem, and then they put it onto the people. Like back then, like they would change it and be like, everyone's bad now, because Joseph, the reason Jesus was alive was because what happened with Joseph? He had a dream that he needed to leave where they were because the king was going to come, right?
No, it wasn't Jesus. No, this is Old Testament.
Mary.
Joseph was Old Testament. So,
right.
Yeah, Joseph was the one that predicted that, gave the prophecy of Moses, basically, which is why Moses was abandoned as a child, because the king. So he's the one that told Pharaoh, right? He's like, look, like, this guy's gonna, kill your firstborn son and take all the Hebrews back to Israel or whatever,
right?
And then the Pharaoh freaks out and he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna kill all Hebrew children. And then so Moses' real mother goes and puts him in the Nile to save him, and he floats down the Nile, and then he ends up directly in the Pharaoh's palace, being raised by the royal family. So Joseph was the one that did that prophesies that.
Right, but there's another prophecy in the Bible about Mary. And
that's in Isaac.
Is that okay? Yeah. So that one, it was a gift from God to be able to have those kind of dreams. It was seen as, and then it wasn't by this pope.
Well,
that was I'm looking
so
up.
The role of a prophet as well is like, that was a village kind of function or a social function. It was like being a garbage man, or I mean, like, like you needed somebody in the community that could receive a communication from God, basically,
Right.
so that you knew what God was. So the reason that you don't like really see prophets running around anymore, other than people that are completely forcing it and trying to convince you of something, is because society today doesn't really have communities or structures set up to where they have a need for a prophet in the community, right?
Yeah.
So the only people that are called prophets today are the ones that are like out there trying to convince you that they're a prophet and that they hear God. Whereas like when you're talking about, you know, Isaac, Joseph, like these biblical prophets or whatever, I mean, there were tons of them and they were all around that area, right? These prophets were just especially important because some big event happened and then it got written down or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
whether the event happened or not, you know,
Yeah, we don't know, right?
yeah. However, these like prophecy was very much a part of like community function back then, right? So a prophet was a civic uh, a civic function.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's how it's been this whole time, like for even oracles or whatever, right? It's a civic function. But so it was, yeah, considered superstitious and against the teachings of the church in the Middle Ages because of this Pope, Augustus. And yeah, and it was not outlawed, but it was, again, against it. So it doesn't matter if it was outlawed or not. Probably not. I'm not going to mess with them like back then, right? You know, I'm going to keep my mouth shut about it because I don't want to get burned alive, whatever. But yeah, there was, because there was kickback on this. That's what I thought, because they were like, wait a second. I thought this was supposed to happen. I thought there was supposed to be people that could have dreams that would get messages from God, right? You know, so why is it bad all of a sudden, right? Yeah. And you're a pope. Why are you having these bad dreams? So it actually ended his career early because bad taste in people, you know, so that, but it was for a moment considered to be against the teachings of the church, which is, it's interesting. So yeah, it's again, people putting their own dramas onto other people. Because I think there's just those dreams would be, I would consider that a dream about, you know, a wet dream, I guess, if you will, would be an ordinary dream.
Right? Oh, yeah.
It would be an ordinary dream or a sexual repressed dream. In the case of somebody that's religious, that's taking a vow of chastity, it would be a sexual repressed dream. So it's
about immediate anxiety or something, like something that's like stirring within you, like
conflict.
Yeah.
Right, because you're going against programming of biology, right? So that's going to probably cause some problems. And they tried to solve that in many ways. It didn't work anyway. They did it, right? So yeah, I mean, that's interesting. But those are a different category of dreams that most people have at some point in their life, right? Some kind of weird dream like that. I don't think I've ever had a dream where I've been held down by a demon, like for that purpose, though. Thank God.
I think I've had one demon dream before, or I think I told you about it, right? It was like, oh shit.
What?
It was right before COVID.
Yeah.
And okay, I forgot about this one when you asked. It was right before COVID. It was like that December or something, and I had a visitation from a demon in a dream, and it came and it was like, I'm gonna choke you until you can't breathe anymore. And I remember I was like so disturbed and frightened by it.
Wait, what? You got choked? What?
Yeah, I told you about that one before though.
Okay.
Yeah.
I maybe you did, but I don't remember. So okay, so you choked, and then what happened?
It came back like a few nights or whatever. It was a dream, like it was asleep, and I didn't know what to make of it. Right. Okay. I was like, okay, this thing was very weird. It stands out in the entity kind of thing. I don't know. It's when you come into contact with a dream character every now and then that just shakes you, you know, and you're just like, I don't think that was a dream character, you know?
Yeah. No, I know. So on that vein, like, that's crazy because I had a choking dream here also Remember, I told
Oh,
him.
it wasn't. I
Okay,
wasn't
I had a
looking at it
choking
then.
dream, and it was about like really disturbing, and I never had that before. But anyways, visitation dreams though, right? Like visitation dreams. Those I've had one that I can remember, and it was so unbelievably real that there's nothing anyone could ever tell me that would make me think otherwise, that it was not actually my uncle coming and saying goodbye, like
Oh
at
yeah.
all. Like this dream was so absolutely tangibly real to me. Like
Mm.
my uncle had died, my best friend, the only person in my family that ever cared, like had a relationship with me, and he was amazing. And I had this dream that I was in a cafeteria of a school, and I don't know where I'm at. I mean, I know I'm in a cafeteria, and like I know in the dream I know where I'm at, but I don't know the place. Do you know what I'm saying? And I sit down with this tray of food at a table that's empty, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, what am I doing here, or whatever. And then I see another tray get sat down at the head of the table, and I see these long sleeve shirts. My uncle always wore long sleeves, and like, and then I heard his voice say, "Is the seat taken?" And I looked up, and it was my Uncle Terry. And I just jumped up and I grabbed him, and I could smell him, and I could feel his he was very thin, bony arms. And I was like hugging him, and I'm like, oh my God. And he looked at me and he goes, "You were right." And I was like, and I knew exactly what he meant. He meant, because we used to argue about whether there's life after death or whatever. He was a staunch atheist, right? Like 100%. And I was like, I would try to convince him, like, hey, like, what's the harm in believing you might go on? Like, what if you're right, you won't know about it. And if you're wrong, like, if you're wrong, you won't know about it. And if you're right, you're good. Like, as long as you believe in something, right? Whatever. I was trying to like make him not be so like kind of dead hard-lined about that. And he looked at me and said, "You were right." And I knew that's what he meant, and I was like, "I told you." And then he's like, "I'm okay. I miss you." And then as I'm hugging him, he just dissolved, like completely dissolved. Sorry, I hit the mic. Dissolved completely into like thin air. And I ended up like hugging myself. And I woke up immediately at that point, and I had tears like streaming down my face of like happiness. I was so happy.
Mm.
And I like woke up and I was like, thank you. Like, cause I had such guilt over that. Like the last time he had called me, I had just had my baby. She was fussy. I didn't talk to him. I said I'd call him back, and then I didn't, and then he died. Like, and I felt horrible about that, right? Like, and he came and told me he was fine and everything was cool, and like that dream, it was so vivid, so real. Like I can smell him right now just talking about it. Like, and there's no way in hell anyone could convince me that it was just a dream. It was like 100% him talking to me. Like, there's no way it wasn't. And that kind of dream is amazing. And I've wanted that to happen with other people, but it hasn't, so I wonder how it decided that will occur for you. But I know a lot of people that have had that kind of dream where they've seen a deceased loved one that's come and given them some kind of message of like, and it's always kind of the same of like, hey, I'm fine, don't worry about it. Right. So that could be a psychological process, possibly, of like grief counseling, like an internal grief counseling kind of vibe, but I don't know, some of that aspects of that dream were so intense that like it was almost as intense as my near-death experience.
So I mean, we went over how I guess the two different classes that clash between whether it was from something external or internal. Is that how it's believed amongst dream interpreters? Is that if it moves your soul to do something, right? So if it's if it's just an internal process, you're just going to be fed a bunch of symbols and maybe unlock a little bit of understanding. But if you have a dream and then you wake up and you do something because of the dream, then that's when the dream came from somewhere external.
Okay. So in Jungian, that would be, so in his take on it, it would be if it's a deity dream and you are moved to do something. But if it's a visitation of someone that's passed away, that would be a different category.
Yeah.
So like, but the traditional one is but they're lumped in the same.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
So deities and deceased relatives would be in the same category. And the only difference would be if it moved
they
you
try
or
not to talk about deceased people that's necromancy. Come on.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
For me. Definitely interesting. That's very interesting. Dreams are very interesting. I mean, we still don't even know what they are, honestly. Like, sleep research has been going and going and going. I worked in it for 20 years. We were not necessarily doing dreams, but we were into sleep. And we still don't know. Like the best explanation we have right now is that it's just a replay of the daily events. And that's
bullshit.
it. I know that is bullshit.
I think the very surface level, I think they can first start dream interpreting. Like you can start dream interpreting right now, and I think it probably it's really easy to do. You just take somebody's dream. Everybody loves talking about dreams, talking about their dreams, right? Like usually it's not socially conscious to start telling people about your dreams, because nobody wants to hear that. But if you give somebody the invitation, right, you can go and you can say, hey, like, you had any weird dreams? And people light up instantly, like, oh my God, like, let me tell you, people love to talk about their dreams. And you can immediately just start interpreting it. So, I mean, a lot of times if I'm interpreting dreams, like I'm Googling the symbols, right? Whatever ones like hit me first. I tend to, like, when I'm interpreting out of tomes, I like to lean towards Islamic, like Sunni, medieval kind of dream interpretation. And the reason that I do that is because I definitely believe the lineage directly from Egyptian dream interpretation. That's as close as you can get. It's in medieval Islam. So I like to see what those dream interpreters have to say a lot. But that's a little later than our man Artemidorus, who is Lydian, Greek, Greco-Roman kind of guy. So he has a lot to say about it too. I think the Muslim dream interpretation is a lot more difficult to wrap your head around and a lot more impractical in a modern context. Like, let's say you have a friend that's like, oh yeah, like I'll interpret your dream. I think with Islamic dream interpretation, you're definitely looking for something that's prophetic or divine. That's where it definitely kicks in.
Okay. So not like the average dream.
Yeah, not like the average dream. But yeah, I guess check out Artemidorus, and then obviously like Freud and Jung kind of wrote the books on how everybody dream interprets today, right? And you can get into that immediately. But there's so much more depth to it because people just take it as like, oh, that's cool. Like you can figure out what's going on in my psyche or whatever. And it's like, like when you really start probing this, you start utilizing it as an occult practice. Like you're talking about direct conversation with your subconscious. You're talking about mastering different altered states of consciousness within your mind, and it all starts from dream interpretation, and it's like you have this immediate door into knowing thyself,
right?
Which is like that is the common thread in every single world religion.
It is
the common thread. It's like know yourself, the kingdom of heaven waits within, like that kind of stuff. And you've got this door and you walk through that door every single night for 8 hours.
Well, like, let me just touch on that really quick. So there are some people that might see this and go, that would be awesome. I would love to do that, but I don't have dreams. Okay. So yes, you do. You're not remembering dreams. And there's a couple reasons that could be the case. So if it's something that you really want to do and you're struggling to like even recall dreams, then there's some things you need to look at in your life, like what's going on. So number one, do you have any like sleep disorders, right? Like sleep apnea inhibits the retention of dreams. Restless leg syndrome also, narcolepsy, and those all prevent REM sleep. So you can't get there, right? So there's a lot of people that are overtired. Like if you're sleep deprived, you're not going to be able to get into that restful REM sleep because you're going to be in this other mode of sleep that's catching you up, like for your body repair stuff. That's a priority over dreams, right? Medications are the main culprit, or drugs and alcohol are very high up there on the list of reasons you wouldn't remember dreams.
Actually, speaking on that, weed for sure. Weed, you're not going to remember anything. There's a really bad practice that you can, bad as in you have to like irresponsibly drink in order to like use it. But basically if you drink enough, you can trigger REM bounce back by the second REM cycle. So you'll miss the first REM cycle, but then the second one and the third one are going to be a lot more vivid and intense. So,
wow.
But I would not recommend that. I would not recommend it because you have to drink a lot.
Wow, I can't believe you know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I told you, but before I started the dreaming thing, like before I started becoming a spiritual thing for me, it was entirely secular and scientific. Like to me, I was just like looking into sleep research, REM cycles, that kind of stuff, trying to rationalize what happened to me during all that sleep paralysis.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, well, okay, yeah, that makes sense because you
yeah,
got a reason behind it.
yeah.
But like, Zoloft, Prozac, those SSRIs are going to inhibit also REM sleep. So if you're having issues with dreaming, and any of those are in your life or, part of your daily routine, then that's likely probably why. Because we all have dreams like we do, even out of REM sleep, but they're not the same kind of dreams. And those are the ones where we're like replaying events of the day, like when you just replay what you did. Like if you have a dream like you went to the post office earlier, mailed a package, and then you have a dream about that, exactly that, and nothing else going on. That's in a different phase of sleep than REM sleep. Those are just considered like trash dreams, actually. But yeah, I would definitely, if you want to do it, you got to kind of be healthy. You got to be healthy, right? Like if you want to do this on a regular basis and practice, you need to have like healthy sleep hygiene and
well, it can't be no, sleep can't be routine.
What do you mean?
Like if you're trying to remember your dreams because you don't remember them, like you want disrupted sleep for sure.
You want disrupted sleep? Okay, so why is that?
So basically, like when you're learning how to get, like, because basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to interrupt the REM cycle, right? Because if you go through one REM cycle and you get out of the REM cycle and you go into that shallow sleep, that's when you don't remember the dream. So you either want to be entering sleep directly into the REM cycle, or you want to be leaving the REM cycle abruptly, right? So that's why when you're like learning how to lucid dream, be like set a alarm clock for midnight, for 2 o'clock in the morning, and for 4 o'clock in the morning, because it's trying to wake you up in the middle of your REM cycle, so you remember the dream, right?
Right.
So if you do one prolonged 8-hour period of sleep and you're not at the same time every single night, if you're doing that every single night and you're like, I don't remember my dreams, well, that's
that
why.
Could be why. Yeah.
It's because you're too healthy.
That makes sense actually, because of the way it cycles through, right? Yeah, that does. Yeah. But see, I don't ever have that problem because I sleep.
Yeah, well, you have a disruptive sleep cycle.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, like, a cure for this is like, it's like, dude, I gotta get my 8 hours of sleep. I've got a job and kids or whatever, and so what you can do, you'll find if you've ever taken like a late morning nap or an early afternoon nap, you get dreams like crazy. You'll slip into hypnagogia. You'll start hearing the radio or the TV or whatever. That is the perfect time to really experiment with dream stuff. That late morning, early afternoon nap. So,
I know exactly what you're talking about, and that is accurate. Yes, definitely. And naps are awesome.
They are awesome.
Yes, that's what we should practice that here in this country. We don't, but siesta.
So I think we're at 2 hours right now.
Are you serious?
Yeah, we're at 2 hours.
Damn. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. So anyways, this was good. Dream interpretation. I mean, I've got a lot to say on dreams. The reason I want to do this episode though is because I was reading this book because I'm working on a project. But I mean, it's really great because you studied this from that kind of like psychological perspective, and then I'm have this practice that I've been utilizing for years and years and years. So,
yeah, you have. Yeah. You're very good at it. Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I was impressed.
So I think the next episode we're going to we talked about a brief history of Western esotericism.
Yeah.
Okay. That one can go off the rails real quick.
Fast.
But I'm excited for that one because I feel like you're gonna have a lot to say. Like you're gonna be like, you're gonna clap back like every single time I bring something up. You're like, no, stop. Like I don't like them. So yeah.
No, I'll try to be nice. I'll try to be good.
No, it'll be fun. I want that one to go off the rails.
I just have hot takes. We both do. We have both our areas where we hot take things and not the popular opinion. And but like I've never been one to just go with the thing because everyone else is. It's like, if
Yeah.
I feel something's off, I'm going to say something about it. And if you can agree or not, I don't care. But yeah, like, I think it'll be fun too. I'm excited for it. So this was nice. So I learned a lot actually from you right now, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I've never actually dug into Freud or Jung on this for whatever reason.
You
right?
don't need to,
So,
because literally the book you're reading is the book that they used to make theirs. So
it was I think the big dream books for me was The Interpretation of Dreams by Ibn Sirin, and that's just kind of for the like biblical dream interpretation, right? But mastering the world mastering the world of lucid dreaming. I can't remember who it was, but I think I read that back in like 2014, trying to make sense of what happened with my sleep paralysis thing.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
That's and I have Jung's book on dreams. This is just dreams, and then Freud's book on dreams. This is the interpretation of dreams. This is 1899. He wrote that 4 years after his dream. And then the consolidated version of both of those books is in Kelly Bocaley's book, An Introduction to Dream Psychology. So, and it does touch on the spiritual, like it absolutely does. So it's not just psychology.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Stone. It's always fun.
Always fun.
You've been listening to Discourse, where we venture into the mysteries of esotericism, the occult, and the depths of spiritual exploration. I am Abammon the Great, joined as always by Dr. Anna Stone, bringing the insights of both practitioner and scholar to guide your journey. Remember, the path of wisdom is illuminated by both knowledge and experience, and each step brings new discoveries. Until next time, continue your exploration and stay attuned to the unseen.